Sacred Space.
So welcome back again to the second part of Sacred Space. My name is John Keeley. It's joined in studio here by Shane Ambrose, and of course Lorraine is still joining us as well. This evening we said, as we spoke to a number of weeks ago, we said we would have a guest on the programme to share with us some of their thoughts, or his thoughts, on Humanae Vitae, which of course is 50 years in existence this particular year. So, to help me to present this part of the programme this morning, I'll hand over to my colleague, Shane. Shane.
Thanks, John.
We have, on the other end of the telephone, I forgot to introduce our guest. Maybe you can.
Sure, no hassle. So, this morning we're joined by Tom Finegan from Mary Immaculate. Good morning, Thomas. How's things?
Good, thanks, Shane. And you?
Not too bad now at all. And as John said at the top of the programme, this year, one of the anniversaries that's been marked in church circles is, of course, the 50th anniversary of the publication of the papal encyclical Humanae Vitae. And of course, as well as it being the 50th anniversary of the publication of the encyclical, in October we're also celebrating, or will be celebrating, the canonization of Paul VI, he's being canonized on or around October the 15th. So this morning, Tom is joining us from Immaculate just to kind of take us through, I suppose, the basics around Humanae Vitae and kind of to just remind us what it says, what it's about, and also, I suppose, context to why, in some respects, it's so controversial. But before we dive into that kind of heavy lifting, Tom, where are you from yourself?
I'm originally from Navan, County Meath, so I grew up there, and then I went to college in Maynooth, in Kildare. I initially went to Dublin, DCU, to do accountancy, but then I switched and began studying theology in Maynooth, and I lived in Kildare for a good while, and only recently enough moved down here to Thurles, to the new Mary Immaculate College campus in Thurles, and the Department of Theology and Religious Studies here.
Ah, very good. And you got sense and left accounting. I wish I had done that myself. So, thanks very much for joining us on the programme this morning. And you were saying you're lecturing with Mary I. Just in general, what are your areas that you cover in Mary I when you're lecturing, or what's your background, if you like, in that sense?
Yeah, well, my research interest would be the area of moral philosophy and moral theology, but I teach also in systematic theology. I have a background as well, qualifications in law as well, and I studied philosophy independently as well. So morality is my main interest, though there's all sorts of other areas that I'd be, kind of an interested looker on, really. So, for example, one of the things I teach at the moment is Christology, which is, really fascinating, but it's not something I actively research in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So, as we were saying, Thomas, this year is the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae, and I suppose for many people, they might be aware of the name, and that it's a controversial enough papal document as it was at the time, and even is down to the present day. But before we start, I suppose, into the document itself, which was published in July '68, there was a bit of history leading up to it, and actually we could go back as far as, I suppose, if you like, 1930 in particular, with the decision of the Anglican Church just in relation to the whole area of artificial contraception.
Yeah, so in 1930, the Anglican Communion's Lambeth Conference decided that in certain circumstances, contraception could be legitimately used by couples. Now, this decision, again, it was controversial within the Communion at the time. Bishop resigned from the conference in light of that decision. The decision also in 1930 contradicted or overturned a previous decision or previous Anglican conference in 1920. So that was the first time any, I suppose you could call it, Christian community or Christian church taught that contraception could be moral, could be practiced without sin. Up until that point, it was pretty much the universal teaching of all mainline Christian churches that it was a sin to use contraception either within or outside marriage. And indeed, published, I think it was in 1963 by a scholar, John Noonan, on the subject, concluded that pretty much every main theologian or saint or doctor of the church that has ever spoken on the topic up until the 20th century thought that it was wrong. So that was the first break that occurred, and obviously when that happened, first of all, the secular press hailed it as a momentous event, and that they hailed it as something that would have a profound impact upon society and culture and moral norms and so on. And obviously it didn't take very long for pressure to come on the Catholic Church to revisit its teaching on contraception. That teaching itself had been reaffirmed very emphatically in 1930 by Pope Pius XI in a papal encyclical called Casti Connubii.
So Pius was he responding to the Lambeth Conference, or it was just coincidental at the time?
Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It was the same year, obviously, as the Lambeth Conference. But I'm not sure which preceded which. I mean, obviously, at least one of the churches was fully cognizant of what was going on in the other church at the time.
Okay.
It was an important year, kind of. It set those two communions apart on a pretty important area of moral theology. Obviously, that has implications well beyond moral teaching. That has implications in terms of communion and ecclesiology between the two churches that resonate today quite strongly.
Right, and then in terms of I suppose looking from a Catholic point of view, I suppose it was we were moving on 40s and 60s up to the 60s, and of course the big change in the early 1960s, of course, is the if you like the coming onto the scene of the contraceptive pill and the challenge then that posed to the Church's teaching. So in the first time I suppose the Church looked at it was this commission from John the 23rd. Of course, good Pope St. John decided he was going to look at it. And of course, that was also done in the whole context of the calling of the Vatican Council. So, what was the story behind that commission that John called?
Yeah, as you say, Shane, I suppose kind of the motive for that is probably twofold. There's obviously a lot of pressure, social, cultural pressure, coming on the Church to have a look again at this teaching, because it's seen and it's understood as a harsh teaching by many. And obviously in the 60s you've got the sexual revolution. You've got, really was a revolution in terms of kind of societal attitude towards sex and responsibility and marriage and family and all of that. And obviously at the heart of it was the idea of free love. And if anything is incompatible with free love, it's the Church's teaching on contraception. So that was going on. The other thing that was going on was, as you mentioned, the massive, I suppose, scientific breakthrough that was the pill. Prior to this, contraception took the form of barrier methods and the forms of condoms, most obviously. The success rate of condoms isn't particularly high. They're awkward to use and so on. With the invention of the pill, women could bring contraceptive use under their own control, and it seemed to raise new questions. For example, it's quite obvious in the case of condoms that something is being prevented, whereas in the case of the pill, a lot of theologians would have said, well, look, what's going on with the pill is something that's different. You've got a suppression of the ovulatory system, of a woman's ovulatory system. Does that raise different biological and theological issues? So in light of that, the Pope established a commission to look again at these questions. This commission itself was referenced in the document Gaudium et Spes of Vatican II, in footnote 14 of it, when it kind of touched briefly on this issue. And there was a lot of expectation within and outside the Church as to what this commission would say. A lot of people were hoping that it would come back with a yes answer, come back and say, in certain circumstances, in light of technological developments or whatever else, it might be permissible, it might not be a sin for couples, for faithful couples to use contraception.
And of course, then of course we head into the end of the council, and it was interesting that Paul VI increased that original commission from John the 23rd, but originally there was only 6 people on it, and Paul enlarged it, I think it was to 58 members, and quite a varied membership, because he included married couples, laywomen, as well as theologians and bishops. But obviously, of course, he had reserved the actual final decision on it to himself, and he'd taken it out of the council's remit. And of course, that brings us along then, I suppose, to the actual encyclical itself, which was published in 1968. Now, I suppose one of the biggest, challenges in relation to this is the fact that probably a lot of people have heard of the document. Probably most people know one of the basic tenets of what it says in terms of the use or non-use of artificial contraception, but probably a lot of people don't actually know what Humanae Vitae said. If you could kind of summarise it in a couple of points, what would you think would be the key things that came about that Paul was trying to teach at that time?
Right. It's not the easiest thing to summarise.
No, I appreciate that.
I'll begin by just outlining briefly some of the things that it didn't affirm, that it didn't propose. It didn't say, it nowhere said that marital sex that doesn't result in children is wrong. It nowhere said that it is wrong or a sin for couples to not have very large families or to try and limit the number of children they have. What it did say is positively that marriage isn't just a social institution, it's actually part of God's plan for humanity, especially God's plan for human sexuality, that marriage is a great good and marital sex is a great good. In fact, that marital sex is kind of intrinsic and essential to marriage. It's not some sort of kind of happy add-on. Marital sex really is the expression of a deep and massively important union between husband and wife. It did say, and this is getting to the heart of the teaching, that sexual intercourse between husband and wife has kind of two dimensions, which are both, intrinsically important. One is the procreative dimension, which is that dimension whereby, I suppose, couples unfold their love for each other by bringing into life a new person made in the image and likeness of God, who's also, in a very important way, in the image and likeness of themselves, of course. The other dimension is the unitive dimension, that sex is really unitive, not just emotionally, although it is, not just in terms of pleasure, although it is, not just psychologically, although it is, but it's unitively real, probably in the most important sense in which it unites two bodies. The husband and wife really do become one flesh with one another. And the point that Encyclical makes is that contraception undermines and actually opposes both those dimensions to marital conjugal love. Probably more obvious in the case of procreation, because obviously with the use of contraceptives, the couples oppose, their will opposes the bringing into new life of a person. Their will deliberately choosing to use contraception is opposed to the good of life, to the good of a new human being who's made in the image and likeness of God. Theologians since then have pointed out that there can be no justifiable reason to set one's will opposed to life in that way. Life is hugely valuable. There is no greater value than in this world than a new human being, than an individual person with their own distinct identity. And the other way in which contraception undermines the marital love in the form of sex between husband and wife is that it actually undermines the very basis for thinking that they really do form a real union in marital sex. The way in which husband and wife become one primarily is by becoming one body, and become one body because they really do unite at the level of reproduction. Reproduction can only take place when there are two mutually coordinated bodies that are differentiated in terms of sex and gender, working together in a complementary way. And contraception undermines that. It dissolves the basis for those bodies working together. There's something that's kind of their union, their bodily union is temporarily sterilised in the form of contraception, whether it's condoms or pill or whatever else, and that actually dissolves the bodily union. There's kind of the appearance of a bodily union still. There's the feeling of a bodily union, but in reality, and moral theology has to deal in reality, there is no union at that level. That's, I think, that's my summary of the core of the teaching. I mean, it's not an easy teaching. The document Humanae Vitae points out that Catholic couples, need to find assistance in living out this teaching through sacramental grace and through prayer. That this teaching will never make any sense to anybody who is not kind of in control of their emotions and their sex drive. The chastity is an essential ingredient for living out this teaching. But it also teaches that, and it's right in saying that it's perfectly possible to live out this teaching, and that the living out this teaching is to the enrichment, benefits the enrichment of marital love, and it benefits the spouse's relationship with not just themselves, but with God, who is the author of life himself.
And I suppose would be one of the main, I feel like, challenges to the teaching, even from the moment of its publication in '68 up to now, is, I suppose people would say it's unrealistic. It's, in one sense, or that it's setting an ideal which people really can't live up to, or it's just not practical for people in their everyday lives. But I suppose that's part of, I suppose, having to engage with the teaching and see what way we can live up to it. Would you say?
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of different arguments levelled against Humanae Vitae. So the claim that it's impractical and that it can't be lived up to is one of the ones that's easiest to defeat, because it's an empirical argument and it's empirically falsified. People do live up to it. There's literally, you can't have precise numbers, but quite literally hundreds of thousands of couples around the world live up to it in the course of their lives. So, it's certainly doable. And there's lots of, another teaching of the Church in relation to morality is that it's always wrong to lie.
Tom, hello.
And again, in context, what's that?
Sorry, could you go back again? You
Hello?
said, yeah, hello, Tom, are you there?
Hello, yeah, Shane, yeah.
Sorry, we dropped you there for a second. You were saying about it's wrong to lie, so if you could take it from there again.
Yeah, well, the Church also teaches that it's intrinsically wrong to lie. That's not an easy teaching to live up to, but again, people do live up to it, and just because a teaching might be difficult doesn't mean that it's not a true teaching, or it doesn't really outline good, virtuous, healthy, fulfilling ways of living one's life. So it certainly it can be done. Obviously, probably this document came at, in a way, the worst possible time, because it's been presented to a culture that's increasingly, I suppose, oblivious to the idea that there's something intrinsically meaningful and important and beautiful and loving about sex. It's a culture which is, increasingly pornographied, individualistic, materialistic, nihilistic even, and it's a culture that struggles even at this point in time to see any sense in the idea that marriage just itself is something worthy and good and worth pursuing. So obviously a teaching in relation to contraception being intrinsically wrong is just going to get a very poor hearing. The other issue in relation to its reception is that it was promulgated at a time where, as I mentioned earlier, there was this huge technological breakthrough with the pill, which made contraception so much easier. There's always been contraception. There's been with the withdrawal method since time immemorial. Condoms first came on the scene, I suppose, maybe roughly late Renaissance period and so on. But with the pill, you have, I suppose, a massive improvement in the efficacy of contraception. So the kind of the success of the pill, if used properly, is something in the region of 99% in cases, which is a very high percentage rate. At the time Humanae Vitae was promulgated, the method that couples would need to use to space out their children, if they wanted to do so, while avoiding use of contraception, would have been something like the rhythm method. And at the time, to use the rhythm method, it wasn't particularly scientifically sophisticated. Maybe charts could be used at the time, but it would have made it quite hard and burdensome and awkward for couples, especially for the woman, to use it. Whereas if the Encyclical was promulgated now, you've got a number of important advancements in terms of technology that makes adhering to Humanae Vitae a lot easier. You've got electronic devices like Ladycom, for example, where it's very easy for the wife to record her temperature and gives an automatic reading as to whether or not she's fertile. You've got various apps that can be used, easily downloaded, very cheap. Use of these methods overall is as cheap as contraceptives, if not cheaper. It's as successful as contraceptives, and more successful in terms of efficacy than condoms, for example. And obviously it doesn't bring any health risks, adverse health risks or so on, as the pill can sometimes do. So in a way, the nub of the point is that Humanae Vitae was promulgated at possibly the worst time in terms of societal reception.
I find that an interesting point. Sorry, that you were saying that if in terms of if it was published today, in some ways it could actually almost be defended at an easier level, in terms of that, because of the technological advances that have been given. The other thing that struck me when I was reading back through it, and this is something that's often been said about it, and I was wondering in terms of people's views on it, that some were saying that Paul's take on the consequences of what Pope Francis now calls a kind of a contraceptive culture was very prophetic in some regards. And I was just reading through it, and it was just saying they were talking about kind of the lowering of moral standards, which everyone kind of worries about today in some regards, in terms of the exposures to temptation for young people, given the increased worries that we have in terms of access to whatever it is online and on the web. But what really struck me actually was his section or his line, seeing how men would react and their views and the way that they treat women. And I was thinking to myself, it wouldn't be a stretch actually to say the whole Me Too movement could actually take that particular line from Humanae Vitae, where he says, men who grow accustomed to the use of the contraceptive methods may forget reverence due to women, disregard for physical and emotional equilibrium, reduce her to being a mere instrument for their satisfaction, and no longer consider them as a partner who they should surround with care and affection. And I was just thinking to myself, in many ways, you could actually just take that out and put it into a Me Too movement tweet, and it would not be out of place.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important to understand Humanae Vitae is in many respects just one small component, part of a wider organic teaching about love and the relationship between men and women and marriage. It's very easy to misunderstand it as this kind of isolated add-on that's just a kind of a really annoying, harsh teaching that the church just threw in, for the crack. The underlying logic of it is very clear, and it's contained in the text that marriage is about love. It's about the gift of oneself to one's spouse, completely freely and totally, holding nothing back, not holding back any part of your body or any part of your being or any part of your future. Exposing yourself to the other to the extent that your love is complete and everything is given. Not trying to say yes to one aspect of your spouse and no to the other. No to the possibility that we may have children together. It's just being completely open and completely loving. So obviously at the heart of this then is real reverence for both the husband from the perspective of the wife and for the wife from the perspective of the husband. And the Pope does make that point, as you just outlined there, that if you say that it's permissible to see the other person's body as a means towards your own sexual gratification, which is ultimately what contraception is about, because people that want contraception don't want it just for marriage; they want it as a way of making pretty much every sexual choice easier to accomplish. If you see that as permissible, then obviously down the line, logically, you're going to have to come to the conclusion that the other person who's always embodied isn't actually that important anyway. And I think that's what's happened. So I know, like a lot of when this was first promulgated, you would have had a lot of liberals in the United States and England, for example, who would have said that the Church's teaching in relation to contraception is kind of anti-woman because ultimately the burden on child rearing falls on women, and they would have kind of interpreted the Humanae Vitae as saying that you cannot but have loads and loads of children, that it's wrong not to limit your family, or it's wrong to limit your family. That's not what Humanae Vitae teaches. That's how it was often interpreted. So a lot of people would have said that Humanae Vitae is anti-woman. This very same sort of liberal mentality that would have been saying that it's important to stand up for women's rights, stand up for the right to abortion, was the very same sort of liberal grouping that would have very much supported and financed and consumed pornography, because again in the 60s you have this explosion in pornography that's continued today, especially in the internet age. And of course we now know that this explosion in pornography has basically led to a situation where the Me Too movement seems completely necessary, where it's taken for granted that young men objectify and depersonalize women when it comes to sex. Where there's such a thing as a rape culture, where you have cases in England that the government feels the need to run adverts saying that rape is wrong. That only kind of happens in a culture where you see little Playboy T-shirts for girls appearing in supermarket stores, as happened a number of years ago. So the two go hand in hand, and I suppose in that sense what Humanae Vitae was doing was something that was countercultural in the sense of opposing where we've ended up, and also really prophetic. It is saying that if you adopt this attitude that casual sex is okay, if you think it's okay to depersonalize yourself and the other person, to use another person for your own gratification, that's going to have consequences. And I think that's been borne out. I think that's come to pass.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're coming up to our time limits on this one. So thanks very much for coming on the programme to tell us and talk to us about that and just remind us of what it is. And I suppose in some ways, if you like, the challenge it still poses to us very much today in relation to that particular teaching. And good food and some very interesting food for thought, actually, Tom, in the last segment there, in terms of the consequences it has in terms of the society that we like and the choices that we make. Something for us, I suppose, to think about this morning on the programme. Now, John, we have a couple of selections of music, or we have a selection of music to close out this segment.
Yeah, I think, Tom, there's one you picked there. There is the Kingdom.
Yes.
We've just got about time to play that. We might just play it that one time and see where we go after that. Okay, let's hear this.
Yep.
There is a Kingdom by whom? Did you say it was again?
It's Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Okay, let's hear this song.
Just like a bird that sings up the sun in a dawn so very dark, such is my faith for you, such is my faith. All the world's darkness can't swallow a single spark, such is my love for you, such is my love. There is a kingdom, there is a king, and he lives without, and he lives within. There is a kingdom, there is a king, and he lives without, and he lives within. The starry heavens above me.
Sacred Space,